There are many legends about the ruins of Baalbek. The monumental 2,000-year-old Temple of Jupiter sits atop 3,000-ton stone blocks. No one seems to know on whose orders it was cut, or why, or how it came to be abandoned. And perhaps the biggest mystery of all is the impracticality of its construction. The temple is a puzzle that has drawn archaeologists from around the world, and a puzzle that won't be solved anytime soon. For political unrest in Lebanon makes it too dangerous for anyone to visit. Could this war be yet another mortal construct of the battle of good and evil? Or is there some great knowledge close to this temple, perhaps a portal or gateway to a higher intelligence that is savagely guarded by all who come to discover it?
Baalbek is one of the big enigmas of which there is very little answers. We're talking about a huge complex that was constructed during Roman times, a massive temple dedicated to the god Jupiter. Amongst the foundations of this incredible complex are stone blocks weighing around 1,000 tons apiece. But the big question comes, did they reuse those stones, those big ones, the 1,000-tonners? That's the thing. And if they did reuse them, who the hell created those stones in the first place, and why so large?
Comment ça a été fabriqué? Comment ils ont pu créer ce...
We wouldn't even be able to reproduce such a structure nowadays. How was it built? How could they have created this huge block of stone?
Some will say that it was superhuman, how these massive stones were carved. It could be done. It could be done with rollers, block and tackle. It would be quite an effort, and there was a reason to do it. The temple is on a hill. You would need very, very strong retaining walls. Huge pieces of stone are useful in that regard, so there's a practical answer. But the more magical speculation is there must have been some special purpose to this location and these massive stones that is beyond our current understanding. The reason for them would be to build very powerful retaining walls so that this temple would last forever.
But why would they want this temple to last forever?
When you simply examine the size of the stones, they're just of such mammoth weight and size that we don't have any cranes today that could even be able to construct them in any sort of way. And here are these stones that apparently were constructed in such a way and just knocked completely over in some sort of massive cataclysm of some kind. We've had stone cutters try, and they interlocked in such a way as to create incredible strength. It's impossible. It's just one of the most fascinating mysteries that we cannot duplicate today. Now, whether or not it was being used as a stargate or some sort of major military complex, let's say, or a fort of some kind, it's all indicative of the same intelligence that humanity was interacting with.
Could this intelligence have predated mainstream science and conventional historians' conclusions that Baalbek was constructed by the Romans? Graham Hancock believes the larger stones surrounding the temple predate the Roman Empire.
Archaeologists have one thing that they regard as a killer argument for why the Romans must have made the megalithic wall as well as the temple. And that is that in the foundations of the megalithic wall, visible, but in the foundations, is a bit of a Roman temple column. And it's in the foundations of the walls. Come round the corner onto the west side of the wall, and there you find the famous trilithon, which is curious, freestanding, unconnected megalithic wall, which doesn't look much like other Roman stuff, actually. It's the three giant blocks that surrounds the Temple of Jupiter. And each of those blocks weighs more than 900 tons. And they are placed so perfectly into position that you cannot get a sheet of paper into the joints. And they're 20 feet above the ground. So the archaeologists say, look, we've got a temple of Jupiter up on top. We've got a Roman column drum being used as a block in the foundations of the wall. Of course, the whole thing was made by the Romans. What they're not taking account of is the fact that Baalbek was used as a fortress for hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm very strongly of the view that that Roman column drum in the foundations of the megalithic wall surrounding the Temple of Jupiter is a later repair rather than an original block. They found Roman columns lying around all over the place, and they stuffed that in there and used it to repair that wall. So I don't think that that column drum proves that the megalithic wall was the work of the Romans. And then we have another thing, which is if you go to the supposed quarry from which the Baalbek stones were taken, you find 3 really humongous blocks of stone. 2 of them have been well known for the last 100 years or so. One's called, I don't know why, it's called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. I stood on top of it. When you're on top of it, you're dwarfed by the scale of the thing. This block weighs 1,000 tons. It's sticking up at a kind of angle. It's been cleanly separated from the bedrock underneath. There's a cut, and it's just sitting there. Across the road is a second giant block. That one is calculated to weigh 1,460 tons, still sitting there in place in the quarry and only discovered by the archaeologists in 2014 because it was covered by sediment. So the archaeologists say the Romans did everything. The Romans made those megalithic blocks. To me, this is, just a very un-Roman thing to do. The Romans were extremely pragmatic people. If they had quarried those blocks, even if they had found they couldn't move them, they would not have left them there. The Romans were never involved with those blocks. They didn't even know those blocks were there. I think we are looking at, if you like, an antediluvian presence at Baalbek. And I think in some way the Romans tapped into that and honored that with their 54 columns around the Temple of Jupiter.
Is it really possible that a megalithic structure was standing at Baalbek years before the time of the Great Deluge? Were these massive stones constructed with the same mathematical codes as the Great Pyramids at Giza? And if so, where does this knowledge come from?
That system of numbers, as a sacred system of numbers, is found in virtually every culture on Earth. Whether they know that it's generated by a key motion of the Earth itself is another question, but that it was part of a sacred system of numbers that had come down from remotest antiquity. I think the Romans were the inheritors of that knowledge as much as anything else. And I think the Temple of Jupiter was placed where it is placed precisely because of that megalithic U-shaped wall that surrounds the Temple of Jupiter on 3 sides. I think they nestled it in to the pre-existing structure.
Temple of Jupiter was built upon older Canaanite temples, which were built on earlier temples, which were built on earlier structures. There's a sect of Maronite Christians that live in Lebanon, and they say that the original structure, whatever it was built by Cain, who was the son of Adam. So that means that whatever original structure had been built there was built very close to the beginning of human life on this planet. But as far as I'm concerned, the beginning of human life on this planet dates back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth, many millions or billions of years ago.
If Baalbek was indeed built on earlier structures, could this be a location that was built by Sumerian gods?
What's so interesting about it is when you look at the original gods from Mesopotamia, how the figures of Enki and Enlil, how they all came to basically take different names. In Greece, thousands of years later, you get Prometheus and you get Zeus. But when you look at what they were said to do, they were said to have done the same things as Enki and Enlil. Then you got the Roman gods, which then grew out of that. So you may be talking about the same gods over a very long period of time. They may be all the same story ultimately.
There does appear to have been a civilization from our solar system that landed and set up shop in this area of Lebanon, as well as in Sumer. Baalbek very nicely fits in with the reports that we see from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets that Baalbek had to be one of the central locations where Enlil and Enki were actually working.
But was Baalbek also the location for some kind of powerful ancient weaponry? And is it more than a coincidence that many of the ancient megalithic structures nearby look to bear the scars of some great battle?
When we look at the state of how Baalbek is today, it's obviously a site that has suffered an incredible catastrophic level of damage. Now, how did that damage actually take place? One potential theory is that some sort of cataclysmic earth change activity happened, but if that was true, wouldn't it make sense that the floodwaters or earthquakes would have damaged the base of the building? Instead, what we appear to see is that the top of the building has been smashed off or scattered, but the bottom is actually okay. This may be a result of a battle that involved much more of a man-made or extraterrestrial-made weaponry. This structure clearly was built with stones that are so heavy that it was meant to withstand an enormous amount of attack. And that again, it suggests that it could have been built by people who were at war, and that now we're seeing the shattered remnant of what was left behind.
Is it possible this is the remnants of an ancient battle? And could this ancient battle have perpetuated more battles between good and evil?
The name Baalbek is derived from the Canaanite god Baal, and the Canaanites in and of themselves are also called the bloodline of Cain, which goes all the way back to the biblical story of Adam and Eve, where in the secret religion of the elite, they believe that Cain was Lucifer's child, that they are all descendants of the bloodline of Cain, and for the elite, this is their religion, and they take it very seriously. I think Baal was highly feared and worshipped when he came to earth. If you look at what happens in the Roman history tradition, we have Rome that was at war with the other big superpower of that era, which we now don't even hear about. It was a country called Carthage.
Carthage was a Phoenician civilization on the African coast of the Mediterranean. It is interesting to note that in the first millennium before Christ, it was the only empire to rival Rome. But during the Punic Wars, Rome quickly overpowered Carthage, claiming the city as its own. Was this because the Roman Empire ascended from a force more powerful than mortal man? And if so, could the Temple of Jupiter have been founded on some kind of extraterrestrial culture?
Around the Temple of Jupiter, there used to be 54 columns. 54, what's the significance of that? Remember I mentioned that the heartbeat of the precessional cycle is the number 72? For 1 degree of precession, 72 years must pass. If you take 72 and add to it half of 72, which is 36, you get 108. Divide 108 by 2 and you get 54. That links the number 54 directly to the precessional cycle. And again, these permutations of the number 72, these developments and elaborations out of the number 72, these multiples and divisors of the number 72, are also found all around the world in ancient mythology.
When the Romans built the Temple of Jupiter, they realized that they were looking at the ruins that had been built by pre-Adamite survivors. They took this seriously. They saw that this awesome stone site, which clearly could not be built by conventional means, was an embodiment of their religion.
But what could the Romans have realized at Baalbek that moved them to build on top of it?
I became very interested in ancient civilizations. I was reading about various stone architectures around the world. The Baalbek stone structure is pretty interesting in of itself. The estimates of the weight of these stones is literally 1,650 tons. You have to have, in our conventional way, a crane in order to move something 50 tons. The crane has to weigh more than 50 tons or else the crane is going to tip over. So how in the world do you move something with that much weight? You'd have to have a crane that weighed more than 1,650 tons. Who in the world would build that, and where would it be? Then not only that, but the crane would have to be able to elevate these slabs more than 50 feet up, and there's no way we can do that. So what in the world is going on in Baalbek? What in the world is going on with this ruin? What seems to be more likely is that there was in fact a portal type of energy that was created at Baalbek by virtue of how the stones were built and aligned. There is something about these stones that we don't understand, where they function almost like tuning forks to capture these natural portals that come from inside the earth. Baalbek may be one of these places where these normally uncontrollable natural portal events were harnessed in, perhaps by the power of these 3 stones. When you go inside of one of these portals, you can actually travel through space and time.
I don't know if the stones at Baalbek possess the quartz crystal which would be necessary in order to have an operational Stargate. They could very well. I do know that they found huge basins in Egypt that on the outside looked like normal stone, but on the inside were pure quartz crystal. And so what you might have at this site is something very similar to that. Those electromagnetic fields that are being generated will interact with the electromagnetic field of a human body, and with the laws of harmonic resonance, you could literally cause change within the body, maybe even down to the DNA level. Baalbek may have been a place to alter creation.
Oh, Baalbek is one of the classic navels of the earth. This is where you allow yourself to escape from the limitations of the physical world, connect with another world. I do believe that the stones themselves, they are highly piezoelectric because A, they have a special type of quartz. When you put all that stuff under pressure, it creates a piezoelectric effect. You're walking into an electromagnetic environment, and these stones themselves are already marking the intersecting lines of the Earth's telluric currents. So they're anchoring the actual energy of the Earth to this place, so it never goes away. That's why we keep going back there. There's something about the energy of place. So it's a truly sacred site of enormous antiquity that basically survives like a living organism from age to age. It just gets rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt.
If Baalbek was able to tap into an electromagnetic field, who then could have built the first structure? Sonia Grace uses her alternative research to dive deeper.
My guides took me in the night, and we stood there at the edge of this ancient site, waiting. A woman appeared, tall and slender, with jewelry around her neck and a skin of fox around her shoulders. She said her name was Meg. She told me she was a descendant of Sekhmet. She told me that the Savrak, the ancient ant people, saved her people beneath this temple in a great cavern that connected to the underground chambers where the people hid and survived the impact of the comet and all the floods that happened throughout the region. She told me that this place and all of these places were connected with the tunnels of the Savrak, and that the giants came back to Earth after they left when Atlantis fell, and they helped the people. They landed their ship at Baalbek, and the giants went on to help build this site. So what happened with this woman, Meg, and she had a whole group of people standing there with me. And she said, I want to show you who built this site. And she said, but you have to trust me. She said, I want you to get on your hands and knees on the ground. And I did. I trusted her. And she said, I want you to put your forehead on the ground. And she said, I want you to say the words, I am one with Mu. And I looked up, and all these giants were standing, surrounding the site. It was really amazing. And I found myself looking at these giants, and they were the ones that said, we built this site. We built it a long time ago, but we helped this group of magicians, and they use that word, this group of magicians from Atlantis, to not only hide under this sacred temple that we had built, but we also helped them create places in the temple that they could return to. And these giants told me that that's why these carvings of all these animals were in the site. Not only did they correlate with the constellations and the stars of that time, but they were in fact the very places this group of magicians returned to. It was like they evaporated and just went right back into the stone. And they told me that when the Anunnaki came, they would take this temple and they would disguise it. They would literally cloak it like it was a lake. So they would reflect like a mirror so that they would never see this site and they would not be able to steal their magic.
Could magic exist at Baalbek? And could civilizations before the Anunnaki have disguised it? If this is true, could its main function have been a device that could help transform our consciousness?
I think that what it comes down to is that when the bigger picture emerges, I do believe that it's going to tell us the ultimate purpose of these ancient codes, that our origins lie within the stars, and that what we call the ancient wisdom is a legacy that was received intuitively as downloads from a non-terrestrial source. And I'm not talking here necessarily about spacemen coming down in spaceships and just telling us something, but that evolution itself has possibly gone hand in hand with some kind of communion with non-terrestrial intelligences, which has given us some kind of master code, some kind of mathematical formula, which we know we probably already have, and we almost certainly use it on a regular basis, but that same code will eventually be shown to exist in the cosmos, and that when we've made that link, it will give us that first contact.
Well, I think Baalbek and other places like it, I believe, was seen as a sacred art where we're trying to replicate and reproduce the perfection of the Pleroma or heaven here on Earth. And by emulating the principles, like using sacred geometry and the golden mean and stuff, we're trying to mimic and replicate what already exists in heaven. It's known as kind of a mythopoetic. When you emulate the creator by creating, it's seen as a very good thing. You're mimicking the act of creation yourself, which is almost seen as a way to reach back into the divine, as a reflection of creation, because you're sort of, by creating yourself, you're almost reflecting it back into the divine, and then creating a bridge or a conduit to infuse with those energies through sympathy. And the more we do that, both within ourselves and our civilization, our architecture, and the way we live, we're able to open a conduit to heaven, and we're able to rejoin heaven and earth, which have been separated. And then once we've done that, we kind of enter the kingdom of light, which isn't somewhere else. It's right here, right now. It's just we have to enter it. We have to live it and reproduce and live our lives by divine guidance and by principles. Like in alchemy, you get heaven and earth are often represented by the eagle and the dragon, who struggle and fight in this terrible battle until they end up defeating each other, and then from their own ashes, the phoenix rises, which is the transcendental consciousness from which we emerge. Basically, that's a story of almost every religion, is what it's about.
If Baalbek was built to tap into the human consciousness of the world, could it have been decommissioned before the Anunnaki arrived? Could the constant use of Baalbek by many civilizations afterwards have been an attempt to figure out its power? If this is true, what kind of civilization would have been moved to change the consciousness of the planet? And more importantly, what beings came later that they wanted to protect its message from?
The king lists go back 266,000 years. Now that's kind of interesting because modern scientists believe that the first humans like us came into existence less than 200,000 years ago.
aurait créé l'Homo sapiens vers 300 000, 250 000 avant Jésus-Christ.
You have to know that when the gods arrived on Earth, according to what the tablets state, they reigned over the earth for thousands of years.
Up next, the Sumerian kings list and the strange turn of events that led to a new civilization of humans on Earth.